My name is Aini Butt. I'm a Year 5 class teacher in a 3-4 entry primary school. And I wanted to discuss today about how we can develop emotional intelligence to support creative spaces, creating safe spaces within the classroom to discuss difficult truths. And the reason I'm very passionate about this is because it wasn't until my time at university that I realized how important critical thinking is to understand other people's perspectives, but also expand our own thinking. And it was during my research at university as well that I stumbled upon Darrell Davis. And Darrell Davis is a Black musician who inspired over 200 members to leave the Ku Klux Klan. And he was on this 30-year quest to find the answer to how can you hate me if you do not know me? And the one thing that always stuck with me was he believed that our perspective becomes our reality. And until we start sharing our perspectives, we cannot take in other people's reality. And this was really important for me to understand because, or for any educator, I think, because I've got 31 children in my classroom. Each and every one of them has a different background. That means they have a different perspective and a different reality. And as much as we encourage diversity, we also need to embrace our differences. And we need to be able to have those safe spaces where children can openly articulate their perspectives on things that matter to them. And especially if their perspective is different to the others, because this is how we expand their knowledge and expand their realities into the real world. And I think it's really upon us, the educators, to create those opportunities for children to see things from different perspectives. And as I was preparing for this session, I was thinking about what it is that has actually allowed me to some extent to create those safe spaces for the children in my class. And while I reflected on my classroom practice, I recognized that one of the things that I have implemented was philosophy for children, which is P4C for short. And it has definitely contributed greatly to creating those safe spaces for children. And although I wanted to talk about my personal experiences within the classroom, I think it's really important for educators to use evidence-based approaches. And I have done a lot of research during my university time and also some action research where I've realized that my classroom practice is evidence-based, and it's really helpful to know that this is not just limited to my context. And the reason is because philosophy is a tool to reflect and analyze. Now, understand that philosophy has various meanings depending on the context it takes place in. So today, I don't want to talk about philosophy in general. I want to talk about philosophy for children. And the reason philosophy for children is very different is because we're not teaching children about philosophers. We're teaching children to engage in a practice of doing philosophy. And it is this doing where hope that children will be able to understand of alternative ways of thinking and look beyond their initial thoughts and explore the assumptions of their thoughts and feelings and how this impacts their actions. Now, P4C also allows children to develop those critical self-reflection skills. And to be able to create those safe spaces for P4C, we need to equip children with a set of skills that without those skills, we actually cannot allow children to open up, because we need to make sure that children open up and they're confident and they feel safe. And to be able to foster that kind of environment, it's really helpful to understand what emotional intelligence is and what the components are. So intelligence itself refers to a unique human mental ability to handle and reason about information. Now, unlike the term IQ, which has been researched extensively throughout the years, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence was first introduced by Daniel Goleman in 1995. So EI, or emotional intelligence, is the interaction of intelligence and emotions in its simplest form. But it actually refers to an individual's capacity to understand and manage their emotions, and then to go beyond those emotions and reason about them and use that emotional knowledge that they've gathered to enhance their thought. So it's a very self-reflective skill. Now, some people might actually argue that emotional intelligence, the term itself, is an oxymoron, because in society, IQ has mostly been used in reference to mathematical and verbal ability. And some people believe that you cannot be emotional and intelligent at the same time. And there's also a belief maybe that IQ determines academic success. So hence it equals successful life. Now, I put up a question on Twitter this morning. I don't know if any of you have seen. So Goldman actually argues that EQ, emotional intelligence, contributes 80% in respect to being successful, while IQ only makes up 20%. Now, when I came across this data, I was actually shocked, because in schools, in our professional lives, we put so much emphasis on IQ that we forget that it only contributes 20% to us being successful. And I think this is one of the many reasons that I believe that schools should actively promote the development of those skills and facilitate the opportunities for children to develop the components of emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence has 5 components, and there are 3 proposed models. I don't have enough time to go into that today, and I'm definitely not an expert on emotional intelligence. But what I have done is I've compiled a list of all the recommended readings and the podcasts and the YouTube TED Talks that I've listened to throughout the years. So I've made up a list, so if anyone's interested, I'm happy to share that with you if you DM me or email afterwards. So looking at the 5 components of emotional intelligence, one of the main components, which I think would be the most important one, is self-awareness. Now, we all know, as Aristotle has said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. So self-awareness is to have that capacity to recognize and understand your emotions, and then to have this sense of your actions and moods and how they might change and how your emotional reactions might change according to your context. So self-awareness then is associated also with being open to different experiences and new ideas and learning from social interactions. So as you can see, being aware of your emotions is very, very important for us to create those safe spaces. Now, as difficult as it might look to create an atmosphere in class where children become aware of their emotions, I have seen reception children being able to articulate their emotions early in the morning. When they come in, they pick their name and they put it under a particular emoji. It might be that they're feeling really happy today because they brought in some show not tell toys, or it might be that they're really upset because they couldn't find their favorite toy. So just by placing their name under a particular emoji, it opens up that discussion about the reason for their emotions. So there's no reason why children as young as 3 or 4 should not be able to be encouraged to talk about their feelings. So once we become aware of our emotions, we then need to know how we can appropriately express them. So the second component, which is equally important, is self-regulation. So we need to make sure that we're flexible, we're coping with change, and we're managing conflict. So to bring us back to our safe spaces, if we're going to be honest to the people within our classrooms and we encourage children to disagree with each other, we need to teach them those skills to do that in a way where we can diffuse difficult or tense situations in an appropriate manner. So one way of doing that, what I've done in my classroom, is where if I can see some tensions arising, I will think out loud. We do thinking out loud a lot when we teach strategies in maths, strategies in English, especially when it comes to writing. So there's no reason why we can't use that same strategy to talk to children about how we can diffuse difficult situations and what is the thinking behind our actions. Another skill which is equally important when I'm talking about safe spaces is social skills. because children need to be able to have active listening skills and understand verbal communication skills, but also non-verbal communication skills, because as we know, over 90% of all communication is non-verbal. And again, this is not just limited to emotional intelligence. In our classrooms, we try to encourage oracy skills and speech and language. We have children in our classrooms maybe that have speech and language communication needs. So it's important to develop those skills because it will help the children beyond our SATs tests or beyond their GCSE tests. It will set them up with skills that they can use for the rest of their lives. Sorry, I've just got someone else coming in. And one of the main skills when we are talking about children being open about their feelings, and then bringing me back to children's realities, if children are sharing their perspectives and that perspective is very different to other people, they need to have the skill of empathy. Now, Goleman breaks this down into 3 levels. He talks about the first level, which is cognitive empathy. And cognitive empathy is about understanding how other people feel. Now, this is a skill that we actually teach actively and is part of national curriculum as well. So in English, for example, when I'm teaching a particular story and we've discussed a character, we then try to understand how the character feels and what the reasons are for the character to feel this particular way. And then we ask the children to write from that character's perspective. Now, this skill, it requires recognition of the other person's emotions, and definitely it requires empathy. So because we're empathizing with the character. So this is why if we are encouraging this skill and we're developing this skill as part of our national curriculum, there's no reason why we can't draw upon those same skills and encourage children to internalize it and develop the ability to self-evaluate their views, not just in English or maths, but in their everyday communication with their peers. The next level is emotional empathy, where you are sharing the same feeling with the other person. The highest level of empathy is compassionate empathy, where you are so moved by the other person's feelings that you feel moved into taking action. Now, this requires a high level of recognition of your own emotions, but also the other person's emotions. Now, the one thing that really struck me with this level is where you have to understand the power dynamics that are in place and how these power dynamics can actually affect feelings and behavior. And sometimes if people do not understand those power dynamics, it actually ends up being a very tense situation. Now, I have actually seen a child in my class who was very passionate, high level compassionate empathy. He was always ready to fight anything that looked like social injustice or unfairness. He would always stand up for his friends and argue with his peers or adults if he believed that his friend was being treated unfairly. Now, so as we can say, in a way, he was being very compassionate. He was using this emotional intelligence component. However, he really struggled to see the power dynamics that were in place. And when he was questioning adults or maybe his peers, he failed to recognize their emotions and how those emotions can actually play a part in that power dynamics. And he got into a lot of trouble because of that. And it was after several sessions of P4C and some personal discussions with him, where there was a lot of show frustration and tears, that slowly I started recognizing that he developed those self-regulatory skills, and he was still then challenging, but challenging in an emotionally intelligent manner. And I think seeing that change in him, it really made me even more passionate, because once you see that, I wouldn't say it was a light bulb moment, because it wasn't something that happened overnight, but it was a gradual change, and that change was very, very important for him, but also for me to see that it does work. Now, the last component is intrinsic motivation. So we need to encourage children to have that motivation to do well for themselves, not just for a badge or for a certificate. Now, this is one that is not always that easy to achieve maybe in schools, because we are very target driven in schools, very much about getting the children to the next level. So this is something that I'm not going to discuss today, because I'm talking about safe spaces. And as I already said, all these components, they do equip children with the skills that they need to be an active member of a safe space. Now, when I'm talking about safe space in education, obviously all children need to have physical safety, a learning environment which is free from violence. But when I'm talking about safe space here, I'm talking as an educational metaphor for designing a classroom where difficult and tension-filled learning encounters are actually facilitated and encouraged. And the reason why I'm not always happy with this term safe space, because it almost implies that a classroom can be quiet and there shouldn't be any conflict. And the reason why I don't sit very comfortably with it is because it almost encourages children to be passive learners and not engage critically. And I've always really find it interesting when children in my class disagree with me. And then I always ask them, what is it that makes them disagree? And it really helps for me to understand their perspective. This is why I came across another metaphor which I really liked, was the concept of classroom of disagreement. Although it sounds a little bit negative, but I think it makes it really explicitly clear that disagreements do exist and they're part of our life now within the classroom, but they're also a part of our life once we leave these classrooms and once we go outside in society on the playground. This is why teachers should actually manage conflict and not prohibit. And this managing of conflict, I think, can be done really, really well through philosophy for children. And establishing these safe spaces or genuine dialogues, I think, does take time. It is not something that is going to happen overnight. It is a set of skills that builds gradually. And one of the biggest challenges that I've faced as a teacher who facilitates P4C discussions is my own beliefs and my own assumptions, and how they might bring something to the dialogue and direct the children in a way that takes them away from their perspective. And as much as we would like to have the answers, the whole point of a P4C inquiry is that we do not have the answer. And I think we need to feel very humbled and listen to what the children bring, because sometimes they can bring very refreshing perspectives to a dialogue. And I think this is why P4C as a pedagogy for diversity allows children to see the different realities as well that people live and hopefully accept them. Now, children are by no means forced to agree. And that is the beauty of P4C. They can listen, they can argue, and then they can either reflect on the initial thoughts and change their mind, or they can develop the tolerance and recognize that it's okay to just agree to disagree, because you're not always going to agree with everyone. And another thing that I always make explicitly clear, that even if no one in the classroom agrees with you, your opinion will still matter as long as you can explain your reasoning, because this actually allows the children to engage critically with what we're discussing. Now, I just wanted to quickly outline what a philosophy session looks like. So typically I'll start with introducing a philosophical question or concept. So the stimuli might be a story, an activity, a puzzle, or just posing a question. Now, the posing of the question might be good at the beginning, but once I got to the point where children were able to identify the concepts and formulate their own questions, I realized that the engagement with the question and the critical analysis of it went up a level. One of the stimuli that I've used a lot is CGI animated short films on YouTube. The reason is because there's always been at least one child in my classroom who will shout out, "Oh, miss, I've seen this one on YouTube." And that is actually a brilliant opportunity for me then to show them that the stimulus for deeper thinking is already out there. I'm not the one stimulating your thinking. The thinking is coming from within you. So for them then to engage with something they've already seen before and then engage with it in a deeper level, it allows them then hopefully to see the world around them in a different way. Now, to encourage children to go beyond their reasoning, we do need some really good stimuli. And in one of the P4C sessions, I used the concept of a happiness hat, and whether you would put on a happiness hat or give it to your friend if you can see they're upset. Now, this concept of happiness hat or happiness glasses can be used with children as young as 4. But my class was a bit older, 10 and 11, and they first discussed the term happiness and what it means to them, and then together they formulated questions such as, can you be happy and sad at the same time? Is it okay to be sad? Is there more sadness than happiness in the world? And should you take medicines to be happy? Now, these questions were all formulated through discussions, and they then shared their views and reasoned why they held those views, and they really went. They were really drawing on their personal experiences, because some children actually opened up about mental health issues and family members who had suffered greatly from this. Now, although we try to sugarcoat a lot of issues or difficult truths that are out there, but children are being exposed to them. And a simple concept like happiness hat actually encourage children to draw upon those experiences without feeling threatened. And once some children started sharing, the others felt more comfortable and shared it as well. Now, one thing that I also wanted to say is that teaching emotional intelligence has been really important to my classroom practice, because we cannot control what the future brings us. And I think this has been never more true than now during lockdown. No one could have ever predicted what happened. And this is why we can be taught how to control our reactions to our emotions and how to tackle those daily challenges. Because at the moment, most of us are not focusing on the IQ part. We're focusing on our emotional intelligence, how to get through our daily lives. And this is just, I'm just talking about the adults, I'm not even talking about the children here. So this is why I think the emphasis on IQ and academic achievements, they do downplay the role of emotional intelligence and resilience and the role they play in a complex and really competitive society out there. And this is why I'm just going to end here where I say that if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. Fortunately, not my quote, is one by Dewey, but I really do believe that after everything that's happened now, we cannot go on to teach children to the test and not recognizing that emotional intelligence is a very, very important part if we want children to be successful and have a successful life and be more aware of their emotions. So I'm now going to have a look at your chats. How can you hate me when you don't even know me? Really interesting to get the data on the contrast between emotional intelligence and IQ. So if you, so my Twitter handle is Aini_Butt. If you want to DM me your email address, I will email it out to you. I've also included the YouTube CGI animated short films, 4 of them. The reason that I haven't actually written what I use them for is because it's only a stimulus. It depends on the question that the children formulate. So I've given you 4 that I've used, and they were really, really helpful in my class. Lots of email addresses, which is nice. Sorry, can you put the link to the YouTube? Yes, so I have put the YouTube videos link and the links to the TED Talks. They're all in in that document that I'm talking about, so I will send it out to you. I think for teachers and school staff right now, it's as much about checking in with your own emotional intelligence as well as supporting children's. That's from Aini Butt, definitely. And I think this is where I was talking about my own assumptions and my own beliefs. And I think this is why P4C is such a great tool, because the teacher is not the all-knowing adult in the classroom anymore. I'm only there to facilitate their thinking. And if any of you have been commenting on my art, you would have seen that I've never agreed or disagreed with any of you. I've always answered with more questions to allow for deeper thinking. And that is the beauty of it, because sometimes if we know the answer already, we're going to lead the children to that answer. And we don't have the right answers. We only have what the children bring to this conversation. Please repeat your email address, please. So my email address is actually really, really simple. It's Aini Butt, AINIBUTT @hotmail.com. Thank you. I'd love access to the document too. Thank you, Mia. Okay, if you do have any questions or any comments, you can unmute. I'm sorry, I've muted everyone for now. I've even muted the tannoy of my classroom. So if there are any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask away. If there are no questions, I'm happy to share one more experience of my classroom practice. And I think I kind of wanted to save this for the end, that once this safe space that I'm talking about was established after children talking about their mental health, I picked up some conversations about children reinforcing some stereotypes. And I then gave them a stimulus to address those stereotypes. So what I did was I gave children some statements, and they had to match the statements with a picture. So this included pictures of Stephen Hawking, and unfortunately, most of the children did kind of do exactly what I kind of predicted, that they put all the bad statements with people of color or Black people or people who were disabled. I know, I'm sorry, I know people are shocked, but that was exactly what I needed to address. And sometimes that is the difficult truth within our classroom, because the more we shy away from it, the more children are going to be restricted to their reality or to their perspective. And this, for this particular activity, while children were matching the statements, it was very interesting to hear their reasoning. And their reasoning was them drawing upon their personal experiences or what they have heard from family members or on TV. And this activity then led the children to talk about their underlying assumptions about disabilities, gender stereotypes, and racial profiling as well. Now, this is something that I believe would be especially beneficial when children return to schools and have questions in regards to George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And this is the reason why in our school we decided not to address this yet, because if we are only teaching children half the issue and then they go back to their parents or to the internet, we are not sure what perspectives they're going to see. So I really do believe that P4C is going to be a great tool to address any emotional issues that children have faced during lockdown, and also to address Black Lives Matters and any unfairness out there that they are feeling angry about or worried about. And I think it's really nice for children to be able to have that safe space. Thank you, Ella. Your ending quote, who was that? That was John Dewey. John Dewey was he lived about 100 years ago. He was a philosopher, and he wrote a paper called Education and Society. And he spoke a lot about how we need to change our perspective on what education brings to society. And unfortunately, we still haven't. And this is why 100 years later, I'm still using a quote by him that we still don't think we're applying properly. So if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. And the reason I've chosen this quote is because if we still keep the emphasis on IQ and academic achievements, which is really worrying, hearing yesterday in the news about how subjects like arts and drama are going to be cut out of the curriculum, and we're maybe being forced to teach a narrow curriculum again. We're not learning from what has happened yesterday. We're literally robbing them of tomorrow again. Oh yeah, I think she said John Dewey. Thank you, Saman. Do you simply have your stimulus and let the children run with it? That's a really good question. I think in the beginning, you've got to be very careful on what you use as a stimulus, because sometimes, although I want a really deep discussion, but if the stimulus is too vague, children won't be able to come up with their own question. So sometimes it might just be good for me to present a question and then children discuss it. So it is something that you have to build up to. So sometimes if I have a short P4C session, I might give them a question and they just discuss it then. And if I know that I've got bigger issues that I want to deal with, my P4C session might run over three days. And that means that we build upon the session. So in the first session, they might only look at the stimulus, discuss what the question is going to be. And I think I forgot to tell you, but the good thing also about P4C is that when children formulate their questions, I do not decide which question is going to be discussed. So every table or in small groups, children vote which question they're going to pose to the rest of the class. And then I write, so I used to have 5 tables. So I write down 5 questions on the board, and then they engage in a democratic vote. So the class votes for which question they want to answer. In the beginning, it is a bit like Eurosong Festival, where children actually just vote for their best friends. But later on, once they realize that actually it is about very important questions, they do tend to vote for the question that they know they'll be able to reason for. And so sometimes you might only be able to pose the questions, and then in the next session, I might show the stimulus again, and then ask them to discuss the question. So there shouldn't be any pressure on a P4C session only to run over one day. It's actually good for them to discuss something and then come back to it. So I've had some people on my Twitter where I was discussing the art, and they came back the next day and said, well, actually, I went back and I looked at the image again this morning, and I think I feel differently about it. And this means that people are able to reflect on the initial thoughts, and that's the whole process of P4C, encouraging children to revisit their initial thoughts and change their mind if needed. And that's the safe space, being able to understand that we can be wrong and it is healthy to change our mind if needed. So I am going to, sorry to be a pain, can you type in your email? The connection is horrible in school, yes. Oh. So that's my email address. And I will finish now because I know that some people have got to get ready for the next session. Thank you very much for being here. I've really enjoyed sharing my classroom practice, and I'm looking forward. So from September onwards, I will be the P4C lead in my school. And I'm really, really looking forward to sharing this with my colleagues as well. And if there are any questions or any resources other than the ones that I've got in the document that I will share with you, please feel free to email me. You know my Twitter handle as well. So any questions, any DMs, please direct them to me. Thank you very much for being here.